Muy buenos días a todos los presentes y todos los que están conectados a través del satélite Amazonas o Internet.
Good morning to everyone present and to those who are connected through the satellite Amazonas or Internet in the different countries. Greetings to the missionary Miguel Bermúdez Marín there in Fe Viva, Valencia, Venezuela. Congregation that the Reverend Miguel Chavez pastors, and also to all the brethren present there from different countries. And may God continue to bless you, missionary Miguel Bermúdez Marín, in this new year of your life. And may you continue to see the prophecies, the promises being fulfilled in the midst of the church. And may they also be fulfilled in you. And may you continue to be of a blessing and testimony in every place where you go this year, so that you may continue to infuse this divine program pertaining to this end time, so that you continue to confirm in the faith of the coming of the Son of Man with his angels every place where you go, and thus the work of your hands be magnified in the midst of the people. May God bless you, missionary Miguel Bermúdez Marín. And to all the ministers and all the brethren as well, and here present. May the blessing of the Almighty One be upon each one of you and upon me as well. Welcome to those who are visiting us here today, in these days here in Puerto Rico. May God bless you, and may you leave to your countries filled with the blessings of God. Let us look in the book of Revelation, which is the scripture that he used there as a basis on this message that we are going to be seeing and listening to, titled The Third Pool, which he read on chapter 5. And we are going to read that first verse. Later on, he will read it to us. And we're going to take this portion on chapter 5 in the book of Revelation. And I saw in the right hand of him that sat on the throne a book written within and on the backside, sealed with 7 seals. And there he writes, the creative word, the scepter of the king. You may please be seated. He tells us, in the message, the day of redemption, preached on July 19, 2008, in Guatemala. It says, it is a really important project. Speaking of the project of the Great Tent Cathedral, because in the prophecies spoken by the angel through the Reverend William Branham, we find that he spoke of a place where he was taken and he saw a great activity that was taking place there. He saw altar calls and also prayer for the sick. It was not his auditorium. It was not his tabernacle. It was someone else. That is in the book of quotation. where he tells us he goes on to say, it was not his tabernacle, it was someone else's. And he says he tried to come down, but he stayed up in the air. And even when he saw the sick being healed, he was in the air seeing everything that was happening. Therefore, it was not his. In other words, that place did not belong to Brother Branham. In paragraph, or page 55, paragraph 474, he tells us, the morning that I dedicated the tabernacle, a vision came, which is written and in the cornerstone there, when the Holy Spirit said to me, this is not your tabernacle. See? And I asked where my tabernacle was. And he set me down under the bright blue skies. And then he said, do the work of an evangelist, and so forth. On top there he writes, a vision written on the cornerstone of the tabernacle. This is not your tabernacle. He wrote that there. And also, on page 74, paragraph 638, it tells us, the morning that the cornerstone was to be laid, and I remember that morning when I had woken up and laying in the room in the upstairs right here on the 7th Street, something said, rise up to your feet. And he writes there, on. And I got up and I saw as it was a great place. And it was like a place where they would, 3 dots, a river run. And he writes, a river in the valley. When I was reading this, Brother William was telling me we were on the other one. I don't know if we were already, we were already in the construction. And he said, there's the river, Benji, running in the valley. And I got down there to the river. And once again he writes river. And I understood it was a place where John the Baptist had been baptizing the people. And they had turned it into a hog lot of pigs. And I was very critical of it, just saying that it should not be done. And while I was there was a voice spoke to me and took me up. There he draws a cornerstone and the ages, and a small arrow toward the cornerstone. And I noticed this tabernacle is just about the state it's in right now. But there were so many people till they were just packed all in the tabernacle in this condition, about the state it's at now. And I was happy, standing behind the pulpit saying, God, how good you are to give me a tabernacle. And at the bottom there he writes, when the cornerstone was going to be placed. And at that time, the angel of the Lord spake to me and said, but this is not your tabernacle. And he writes above, a valley, a river, and a tabernacle. And he writes, this is not your tabernacle. And with a question mark, he writes, who is it? That is, that place had to be someone's. Now notice also on page 25, paragraph 211. You have already read that. We have read it. But this little part here says, and I noticed a crowd of people that seemed to cover a city block or more that was standing in line. There was a little building, a wooden building, inside of this tent. And there was a woman standing there, a man, one taking names, and people were going in on crutches and stretchers and coming out the other side walking. Well, I wonder, what all taking place in there? And then that angel of the Lord, whose picture you see here, it went from me and went right over that little building. He writes there, the 10th vision. That is where he says, miracles happening before Brother Branham arrives. And stood there, then went down, and a voice spoke and said, I'll meet you in that place. Now notice that it was a place where all of that was already happening. And yet, still, the resurrection had not happened by that time, because Brother Branham had not come down yet, of which he tells us that everything was taking place, everything happening there under that ministry that was there in the midst of the church. Our Brother William continues saying, now, the Reverend William Branham also says that the saints that departed see us from where they are at. That is, from heaven they can see here. And therefore, he had already departed, and he's seeing everything that is happening. In other words, he went into a time in that vision, he went into a time that corresponds to after he had passed away, because that prophecy was not fulfilled in the time in which he lived. And let us go on to this book. It was handed out here, my life story. It was handed out in a booklet, if you have it here. I don't know if it was. Yeah, you have it, right? We handed it out. It is on the 10th website as well. Now notice, here, and he left something here for me. And for some time ago, he told me to read it. Read it from this page to that page. He even gave me the page and the paragraph so that we would read it. So today, we are going to read this portion here, which gives us a very important teaching. I told him, well, I will read it this Sunday the 1st. And we saw there that the subject is the third pool. Let us go to page 24. On this book. Here he's talking about when he was invited to an activity. That is in the previous pages, but we're going to begin here, which is the one he told me to begin reading. Notice it says, and oh, he said, all of the preachers, regardless of denomination, come to the platform. Well, there was about 200 of us up there. I went up. And so he said, now we haven't got time for you all to preach. He said, just walk by and say who you are and where you're from. Well, it came my time. I said, William Branham Baptist, Jeffersonville, Indiana, walk by. I'd heard all the rest of them call themselves Pentecostal, 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 PA of W, the acronyms. And when I walked by, I thought, well, I guess I'm the ugly duckling. So I sat down, waited. And that day, they had fine young preachers out there. And they had preached powerfully. And then they said, the one's going to bring the message tonight is, I believe they called him elder, and their ministers instead of reverend. It was elder. And they brought an old colored man out there, and he had one of these old-fashioned preacher's coats. I don't guess you ever seen one. Long pigeon tail in the back, you know, with a velvet collar. And he had just a little white rim of hair around his head. Poor old fellow, he come out like this, you know, and he stood there and he turned around. And where all the preachers had been preaching about Jesus and the great, how great he was, and so forth, that old man took his text from over in Job. Where was you when I laid the foundation of the world? Or when the morning stars sang together and the Son of God shouted for joy? And the poor old fellow, I thought, why didn't they put some of them young fellows up there to preach? Great, the place was packed and jammed. And I thought, why didn't they do that? So then this old fellow, instead of preaching what was going on down here on earth, he began to preach what was going on in heaven all the time. Well, he took him up at the beginning of time, and brought him back in the second coming down the horizontal rainbow. Why, I never heard such a preaching in my life. About that time, the Spirit hit him. He jumped about that high and clicked his heels together, throwed his shoulders back, and went tipping off that platform, said, you haven't got room enough up here for me to preach. And he had more room than I got here. That is where Brother Branham was preaching. Where the elder was at that moment was a big platform. And I thought, if that make an old man act like that, what would it do if it got on me? I thought, maybe I need some of that. Why, he came out there, I felt so sorry for the old fellow. But when he left, I was feeling sorry for myself. And he draws a Star of David. And I looked at him go off there. I went out that night and I thought, now the next morning I'm not going to let nobody know who I am. So I went. And that night I pressed my trousers. I took the 3 dots, went out in the cornfield to sleep. And I went down and brought me some stale rolls. 3 dots. I bought a whole bunch of them for a nickel. There was a hydrant down there, and I got some water. So I know that would last me a little while. So I got me some water and drank it. And I went eat my rolls. And I come back and got another drink of water. Went out in the cornfield, took the 2 seats and laid my little seersucker trousers in there, pressed them on the seat. And that night, I prayed pretty near all night and said, Lord, what is this I got into? I never seen such a religious people in my life. And I said, help me to know what this is all about. And the next morning I got down there, invited us for breakfast. Of course, I wouldn't come eat with them because I had nothing to put in the offering. And I just went back. And the next morning when I went in, why, I ate some of my rolls and I sat down. And they was got on a microphone. And I had never seen a microphone before. And I was scared of that thing. So and it had a little string hanging up here. And it hanging down. One of them dropped mics. And he said, last night on the platform, there was a young preacher here, a Baptist. And I thought, oh, I'm going for a working over now. And he said, he was the youngest preacher on the platform. His name was Branham. Does anybody knows any whereabouts of him? Tell him to come on. We want him to bring the morning message. And he draws a Star of David. Now notice what he's representing there. Morning message. The message of a new dispensational day. Oh my. I had a little t-shirt on. And seersucker's trousers, you know. And we Baptists believe you had to have a suit on to get in the pulpit. You know. So, I just sat real still. And during the time, they had it up in the north then, because their international convention, the colored people couldn't come in to it if it was in the south. They had the colored there, and I was a southerner. Had starch in my color yet, you see. Thought I was a little better than somebody else. And it happened to be that morning, sit right down by me was a colored man. So I sat and looked up at him. I thought, well, he's a brother. And he said, anybody knows the whereabouts of William Branham? I scooted down in the seat like this. That is, he ducked down as if no one will see me here. As one does sometimes when you're like, well, I hope I'm not called. So he said, announced it the second time, said, anybody on the outside? He pulled this little mic in. They used to hang it like this back then. Knows the whereabouts of William Branham? Tell him we want him on the platform for the morning message. He's a Baptist preacher from the southern Indiana. I just sat real still and ducked down, you know. Nobody knows me anyhow. That colored boy looked over at me and said, do you know where he is? And I thought, I either had to lie or do something. So I said, hold down here. He said to the young man. He said, yes, sir. I said, I want to tell you something. I said, I'm him. He said, well, go on up there. And I said, no, I can't. See? I said, I got on this little old seersucker's trousers and this little t-shirt. I said, I couldn't go up there. He said, then people don't care how you dress. Go on up there. I said, no. I said, keep still. Don't say nothing now. And they come back to the phone a minute. That is that person. Said, anybody knows the whereabouts of William Branham? He said, here he is. There he told on him. Here he is, here he is. Oh my. There I got up with that little t-shirt on, you know. And he said, come on up, Mr. Branham. We want you to bring the message. Oh my, before all them preachers, all them people. And I went sleeping up, you know, my face red and my ears burning. You already know how that feels. That you get like your ears fried out. Look, Mines are burning right now. And I slipped up, seersucker's trousers and t-shirt, preacher, baptized preacher going up to the microphone. Never seen one before, you see. And I stood up there. I said, well, I don't know about this. I was fumbling real nervous, you know, and I got over here around Luke 16. And I thought, well, now, and I got in the subject. And the subject was, and he lifted up his eyes in hell and cried. And I got, so I began to preach, you know, and I got to preaching and felt a little better. And I said, the rich man was in hell and he cried. That is in Luke 16 there, where the story of Lazarus and the rich man is. Remember that the third pool, Brother Branham says, in souls that are in prison now, he says that Jesus had that time of his third pool. He says that he was ready for the third pool, where he preached to the souls that were disobedient in the time of Noah. That little three words, like I have a lot of sermons like that, believest thou this, and speak to the rock? You've heard me preach them. And I had, and then he cried. And I said, there is no children there, certainly not in hell. Then he cried. And I said, there's no flowers there. Then he cried. In other words, that is the sermon he was carrying out. Then he cried. There is no God there. Then he cried. There's no Christ there. Then he cried. Then I cried. Something got a hold of me. Now notice, on one occasion, Brother Branham, speaking about that occasion when they put him under anesthesia, when his little friend shot him in the legs, he says he went down, it seems like he was falling, and he says that the presence of God was not there. And that when he told me that the Great Tribulation is a terrible thing, it is a place, I think it was Thursday of this week or Wednesday, that I wrote it down. I think I even recorded it, where he showed me that there is a place where even that feeling which you now have, that you have a need and you pray and you feel that someone is listening to you who is God, and that feeling that, well, I already prayed, God is going to answer my prayer. Well, I already asked, and I know that God is going to do it. That feeling that someone is listening to you, that someone is going to answer to you, that doesn't exist in hell. That's not there. That part of that heavenly help that we feel when we pray to God, that does not exist in that place. That is why it is the darkest and most horrible place where the presence of God is not found. That is why he told me, that is terrible. That is going to be so and so terrible, Benji. Something got a hold of me, Oh my, after, I don't know what happened. When I kind of got to myself, I was standing on the outside, and he draws a Star of David there. Then people got screaming and shouting and crying. That is, those who were there when he preached. And we had an awful time. When I come outside, there was a fellow walk up to me with a great big Texas hat on, big boots. Walk up, said, "I'm Elder so-and-so, preacher, cowboy boots, cowboy clothes on." I thought, well, my seersucker's trousers ain't so bad then. Said, "I want you to come down to Texas and hold me a revival." Let me put that down, mister. And I put it down like that. Here come a fellow up with one of these little kind of a golf trousers on, where they're used to play golf, you know. And them little blouse pants. He said, "I'm Elder so-and-so from Miami. I like to, maybe dressing isn't so much of it." And he draws a Star of David. And I looked at it, and I thought, all right. Now notice, the garments doesn't matter. The veil of flesh that God uses. The important thing is the work that that instrument is carrying out. So, I grabbed these things, and home I went. Wife met me, she said. "That is hope." "What do you sound so happy about, Billy?" I said, "Oh, I met the cream of the crop." Like one says, that's the best. It's the best you ever seen. Them people ain't ashamed of their religion. And I told her all about it and said, "Oh, looky here, honey, a whole string of invitations, them people." She said, "They're not holy rollers, are they?" I said, "I don't know what kind of a roller they are, but they got something that I needed, see?" I said, that's one thing I'm sure. I said, "I seen an old man, 90 years old, come young again." I said, "I never heard such a preaching in my life." "Why, I never seen a Baptist preach like that." I said, "They preach till they get out of breath and bend their knees plump to the floor, come back up, catch their breath. You can hear them 2 blocks away, still preaching." And I said, I never heard such in my life." And I said, "They speak in an unknown tongue, and the other one tells what they are talking about. Never heard such in my life." I said, "Would you go with me?" She said, "Honey, when I married you, I will stick with you until death shall separate us." She said, "I'll go." She said, "Now we'll tell the folks." Remember that they were very young fellows. And I said, "Well, you tell your mama, and I tell my mama." So I went and I told Mama. Mama said, "Well, sure, Billy. Whatever the Lord's called you to do, go do it." And there he draws a cornerstone and the ages and an arrow toward the 7th age. And on the other side, he draws a Star of David. Go do it. And so Miss Brombach asked for me to come up. That was his mother-in-law. Went up. She said, "What's this you're talking about?" I said, "Oh, Mrs. Brombach," I said, "you all never seen such a people." She said, "Quieten down, quieten down." I said, "Yes, ma'am." I said, "I'm sorry." And she said, "Did you know that's a bunch of holy rollers?" I said, "No, ma'am, I didn't know that." I said, They sure are fine people." She said, "The very idea. Do you think you'd drag my daughter out amongst stuff like that?" said, ridiculous. That's nothing but trash that the other churches has thrown out. She said, indeed, you'll not bring my daughter out like that. And I said, but you know, Mrs. Brumbach, down in my heart, I feel that the Lord wants me to go with them people. She said, you go back up to your church until they are able to afford a personage for you and act like a man that's got some sense. Said, you're not taking my daughter out through there. I said, yes, ma'am. I turned around and walked out. And Hope started crying. She come out, she said, Billy, regardless of what Mama says, I'll stay with you. Bless her heart. And there he draws Star of David. And I said, oh, that's all right, honey. And I just let it go. She wouldn't let her daughter go with such a people as that because it wasn't nothing but trash. And so I just kind of let it go. It was the worst mistake I ever made in my life. One of the worst. A little later, few years after, the children come. That is Billy and Sharon Rose. And one day there come up a flood in 1937. He writes 1937. And I was patrol at that time, and I was trying my best to bring the people out of the flood, houses tearing down. And my own wife took sick, and she was real sick with pneumonia. And there he draws a Star of David. Notice she got sick from pneumonia. And they took her out. The regular hospital was so full, we couldn't put her in there. So we taken her out to the government where they had a room out there. And so then they called me back out. And I always lived on the river and quite a boatman. So I was trying to get the people, rescue them from the flood. And then they called me, said, there's a house over on Chestnut Street. It's about to go in. There's a mother and a bunch of children in there, said. If you think your boat, your motor can get into them. I said, well, I'll do all I can. And he left his wife there and left. And the baby girl. And I, shooting those waves, the dig had broke up there, and oh my, they just washing the city out. And I would give it all the juice that I could. And finally down across the alleys and through the places, and I got there close to where the old levee was. The water pouring through, and I heard someone scream, and I seen a mother standing out on the porch, and there was them big rollers going through like that. Well, I went up this way as far as I could. I hit the stream and come back and got on that side. I had got my boat stopped just in time to tie it around the pillar of the post, of the door post or porch post. And I run in and grabbed the mother and got her in there, and 2 or 3 of their children. And I undone my boat and got her to back, come out way down below, and got her over to the shore about 1.5 miles across the city, till I got her to the shore. And then when I got over there, she had fainted, and she had begun. She was screaming, my baby, my baby. Well, I thought that she meant she had left her baby in the house. Oh my. And I took back again while they was trying to take care of her. And I come to find out she was wanting to know where her baby was there. In other words, right there where they were at. There was a little fellow about 3 years old, and I thought she meant a little nursing baby or something. And so I took back and got over there. That is, he went back to the place. And when I got that boat and got on the inside and couldn't find no baby, and the porch gave way and the house went in, and I run real quick and grabbed the piece there that was floating my boat, got into the boat, and pulled that and loosed it up. It had collapsed. It was going into the current. And he pulled the piece of the pole that the boat was tied to. He managed to untie it and reeled the rope in. And he done got me out into the current of the main river then. And it was about 11:30 at night, and just sleeting and snowing. And he also draws a Star of David there. And I grabbed a hold of the starter string and tried to pull the boat, and it wouldn't start. He was trying to turn on the boat motor, and I tried, and it wouldn't start, and I tried again, getting further in that current. The falls just below me, and I was trying real hard, and I thought, oh my, here is my end. This is it. And I tried real hard, and I said, Lord, please don't let me die a death like this. And I pulled and I pulled, and it came back to me. What about that bunch of trash that you wouldn't go to? See? He says, and I put my hand back on the boat, and I said, God, be merciful of me. Don't let me leave my wife and my baby like this, and them out there sick. Please. And I just keep pulling like that, and it wouldn't start. And I could hear the roaring down there, 'cause just a few minutes, and oh my, that would be it. And I said, Lord, if you forgive me, I promise you I'll do anything. Kneel in that boat there, and the sleet hitting me in the face, I said, I'll do anything that you want me to do. And I pulled again, and it started. God heard him there. And I turned all the gas on it I could, and finally got onto the shore. And I went back to find the truck, patrol truck. And I thought, there was some of them say the government just washed away my wife and my baby in there, both babies. That is Billy and Sharon as well. And I took out for the government as hard as I could. And water was standing about 15 feet deep all through it. And there was a major there, and I said, Major, what happened to the hospital? Said, now don't worry, do you have anyone in there? I said, yes, a sick wife and 2 babies. He said, they all got out. Said, they're in a freight car, and they're headed towards Charleston. I run, got in my boat, or got in my car, and my boat in the back of it, and run out there. And then the creeks had come down about 2.5 or 3 miles wide. And all night long I tried. Some of them said the freight car was washed off the track out there on the trestle. Well, I find myself marooned out on a little island. And he writes an island. Stayed there 3 days. And here the lines that. I had plenty of time to think about whether that was trash or not. Just beating, where's my wife? Finally, when I found her, in a few days after I got out and got across, she was way up to Columbus, Indiana, in the Baptist auditorium, where they had made a hospital-like sick room on little government cots. And I ran to her as hard as I could, trying to find where she was, screaming, hope, hope, hope. And I looked, and there she was laying on a cot, and TB had set in. She raised her little bony hand, and she said, Billy. And I ran to her and said, Hope, honey. She said, I look awful, don't I? I said, no, honey, you look all right. For about 6 months, we worked with everything that was in us to try to get to save her life. But she kept getting lower and lower. And he writes on the side, 6 months. And he draws a Star of David. One day, that is. In other words, they spent, that time, 6 months, struggling, fighting against that sickness, which she had contracted, got infected with. One day I was on patrol and I had my radio turned on, and I thought I heard them say, make a call on the radio, said, for William Branham. Wanted at the hospital at once. Wife dying. I rushed back to the hospital as quick as I could. Turned on the red light and the siren, and I took off. And then I got up at the hospital and stopped running. Coming down through the hospital, I seen a little buddy of mine that we fished together. We ran together as boys. Sam Adair. Dr. Sam Adair. He's the one that was the vision come not long ago and told him about the clinic. And he said, if anybody doubted the vision, just call him collect. That is, charging the phone call to his phone. Just call him collect. You want to know about whether it was right or not. And so then here he come out like that, and he had a hat in his hand. He looked at me, and he just started crying. That is, if he had his hat like this. And I ran up to him, throwed my arms around him. He put his arms around me, said, Billy, she's going. I'm sorry. I've done all I could do. I've had specialists and everything. I said, Sam, surely she's not going. Said, yep, she's going. And he said, don't go in there, Bill. And I said, I got to go in, Sam. And he said, don't do it. Don't. Please don't. I said, let me go in. Said, I'll go with you. I said, no, you stay out here. I want to stay with her in her last minutes. Said, she's unconscious. I walk in the room, and the nurse was sitting there, and she was crying, because she and Hope were schoolmates together. And so I looked over, and she started crying, put her hand up, and started walking over. And I looked over and shook her. There she was. She had went down from about 120 pounds, that's 55 kilograms, to about 60, that's 27 kilograms. And I shook her. That is, he moved her. And if I live to be 100 years old, I'll never forget what happened. She turned over, and those great big pretty eyes looked up at me. She smiled. She said, why did you call me back, Billy? Notice she heard the voice. Doesn't it? It says that the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God of Man, and they shall rise? I said, honey, I just got the cast. I just had to work. We was way in debt, and hundreds of dollars of doctor bill, and nothing to pay it with. And I just had to work. And I seen her 2 or 3 times a day, and every night. That is, he would go work. He would go several times to where she was. And then when she was in that condition, I said, what do you mean, called you back? She said, Bill, You preached about it. You've talked about it, but you don't have no idea what it is. I said, what are you talking about? She said, heaven. She said, look, she said, I was being escorted home by some people, men or women or something. They was dressed in white. And she said, I was at ease and peace. Said, big pretty birds flying from tree to tree. She said, don't think I'm beside myself. So he might think that she was. She said, Billy, I'm going to tell you our mistake. She said, sit down. I didn't. I kneeled down, took her hand. She said, you know where our mistake is? And he writes, the mistake. And I said, yes, sweetheart, I do. She said, we should have never listened to Mama. Them people were right. And he drew a Star of David on both sides of 2020. And I said, I know it. She said, promise me this, that you go to those people. And he draws another Star of David there. Said, because they're right. And she said, raise my children like that. And she said, I want to tell you something. She said, I'm dying, but said, don't dread going. Said, it's beautiful. She said, the only thing, I hate to leave you, Bill. And I know you got these two little children to raise. She said, promise me that you'll not stay single and let my children be pulled about from pillar to post. That was a sensible thing for a 21-year-old mother. And I said, I can't promise that, Hope. She said, please promise me. Said, one thing I want to tell you. Said, you remember that rifle? I'm just crazy about guns. And she said, you wanted to buy that rifle that day and you didn't have enough money to make the down payment. That is to give the down payment. I said, yes. She said, I've been saving my money, my nickels, to try to make that down payment on that rifle for you. She said, now, when this is over and you go back home, look up on the duofold or the folding bed under that piece of paper on top, and you'll find the money there. She said, promise me that you'll buy that rifle. You don't know how I felt when I seen that $1.75 in nickels laying there. I got the rifle. He just Star of David. And she said, you remember that time that you were going downtown to buy a pair of stockings and we was going to Fort Wayne? I said, yes. I had come in from fishing. And she said, we had to go to Fort Wayne. I had to preach that night. And she said, you know, I told you there is two different kinds. One called chiffon, and what's the other one? Rayon. Is that right? Rayon and chiffon. Well, ever which is, chiffon was the best. Is that right? And she said, now, you get me some chiffon, the full style. You know that thing that's got that little thing in the back of the stocking at the top? And I didn't know nothing about women's clothes, so I was going down the street and saying, chiffon, 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 so that he wouldn't forget it. Trying to keep things of chiffon, chiffon, chiffon. Somebody said, hello, Billy. I said, oh, hello, hello. Chiffon, 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 chiffon. And I got to the corner, and I met Mr. Spahn. He said, hey, Billy, Do you know the perch is biting now over on the side of that last pier? I said, sure enough. Is that right? Yeah. And I thought now, when I left him, what was that stuff? I forgot it. So, Thelma Ford, a girl that I know, worked at the 10-cent store. And I know they sell women's stocking over there, so I went over. I said, hi, Thelma. And she said, hi, Billy. How are you? How's Hope? I said, fine. I said, Thelma, I want a pair of socks for Hope. She said, Hope don't want socks. I said, yes, ma'am, she sure does. She said, you mean stockings? Oh, sure, I said. That's what it is. I thought, oh, I don't show my ignorance. And she said, what kind does she want? And I thought, oh. I said, what kind did you got? She said, well, we got rayon. I didn't know the difference. Rayon, chiffon, all sound the same. I said, that's what I want. It's like, at least now, I don't know if it happens to someone that it happened to me. Look, since you're around there, get me such and such a thing. And there is the same, but in two different types. And well, since now you can take the receipt and they will take it back, I just take both. And in that way, I always get it right. I take one out, that's not the one. I told you such and such a thing. Then here it is. And I'll return this one. And you can do that when you have that chance to return it. But there he says, rayon, it all sounds the same. I said, that's the one I want. She said, I said, fix me a pair of them full style. And I got, that's wrong. What is it? Full fashion. And so I said, fix me a pair of them. And when she went to give them to me, there was only about 30 cents, 20 cents, or 30 cents, about half price. Well, I said, give me 2 pairs of them, see? And I went back home and I said, you know, honey, you women shop all over town to find bargains. You know how you like to crow. And I said, but here, look here. I bought 2 pairs for the price that you buy 1 pair with. See? I said, oh, that's my personal ability. See, he was like, so I said, you know, Thelma sold me these. I said, she might have let me have them half price. She said, did you get chiffon? I said, yes, ma'am. It all sounded the same to me. I didn't know there was any difference. And she told me, she said, Billy, I thought strange when she got to Fort Wayne, she had to get another pair of stockings. She said, Billy, I gave them to your mother, said, they're for older women. Said, I'm sorry I did that. And I said, oh, that's all right, honey. And she said, now. And there he goes on and continues narrating. Now, don't live single. And she said, remember, she's telling him that, Hope, there in the bed right there. She said, she didn't know what was fixing to happen in a few hours from then. And I held her darling hands while the angels of God packed her away. And I went home. I didn't know what to do. Now notice something here important. Just like she was telling him that which happened, that is how also they will do when they come back in the resurrection. Don't you remember such and such a thing? Don't you remember this or that? Remember that she had already come back there. And that represents that resurrection there, where when we see them, maybe at first we will not recognize them, but then they will start speaking about things that happen in our daily lives with them. I went home. I didn't know what to do. I lay down there at night and I heard. I think it was a little mouse. Was in the old grate where we had some papers in there, and I shut the door with my foot, and there hung her kimono on the back, and laying down there in the morgue. And just in a little bit, someone called me, said, "Billy." And it was Brother Frank Broy. He said, "Your baby's dying." I said, "My baby?" Said, "Yes, Sharon Rose." Said, "Doc's up there now," and said, "She's got tubercular meningitis. She nursed it from her mother." And said, "She's dying." I got in the car, went up there, and there she was, the sweet little thing. And they rushed her to the hospital. I went out to see him. Sam come up and said, "Billy, don't you go in that room. You got to think of Billy Paul." That is, his oldest, the boy. Said, "She's dying." I said, "Doc, I got to see my baby." He said, "No, you can't go in." Said, "She's got meningitis. Billy, and you pack it to Billy Paul." And I waited till he got out. I couldn't stand to see her die. And her mother laying down there in the undertaker's establishment. I tell you, the way of transgressor is hard. And there he draws a Star of David. And I went, slipped in the door. And when Sam went out and the nurse went out, I went down into the basement. It's a little bitty hospital. She was in an isolated place because so that she wouldn't infect others. And the flies was in her little eyes. And they had a little, what we call a mosquito bar. That is like little screens. Or little netting over her eyes. And she, with little spasms, her little fat leg was moving up and down like that. And her little hands, with that spasm. And I looked at her. And she was just being enough to be cute, about 8 months old. And there he writes, 8 months. And her mother used to set her out there with her little 3-corner on, you know, in the yard when I come up. And I'd toot the horn, and she'd go, "Goo-goo, goo-goo," reaching for me, you know. And there laid my darling dying. And I looked down to her. I said, "Shari, you know Daddy? You know Daddy, Shari?" And when she looked, she was suffering so hard till one of them pretty little blue eyes had crossed. And Brother William underlines that more than what he has already been underlining the other part. It like to have tore my heart out of me. I kneeled down. I said, "Lord, what have I done? Have not I preached the gospel on the street corners? I've done everything that I know to do. Don't hold it against me. I never called them people trash." It was her that called them people trash. I said, "I'm sorry it all happened. Forgive me. Don't take my baby." And while I was praying, looked like a sheet of cloth come down. I knowed he had refused me. And I said, there was the hardest and most treacherous time of my life. And there he draws a Star of David. That is in the previous paragraph. He drew that there. When I raised up and looked at her, and I thought, Satan put in my mind. No, that the struggle is right there in the mind. When I raised up and looked at her, and I thought, Satan put in my mind. Well, you mean as hard as you've preached and the way you lived, and now when it comes to your own baby, he'll turn you down. That is God. And I said, that's right. If he can't save my baby, then I can't. I stopped. Three dots and I stopped. I just didn't know what to do. And then I said this. I said, Lord, you gave her to me, and you take her away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And there he draws a Star of David. If you take even me, I'll still love you. And I put my hand on her, and I said, bless you, sweetheart. Daddy wanted to raise you. With all my heart, I wanted to raise you and raise you to love the Lord. But the angels are coming for you, sweetheart. Daddy will take your little body down and lay it on the arms of Mama. I'll bury you with her. Someday, Daddy will meet you. You just wait up there with Mama. When her mother was dying, she said, last words she said, Bill, stay on the field. And there he drew a Star of David. And I said, oh, she said, I said, if I'm on the field when he comes, I'll get the kids and meet. If you're preaching when he comes. If I'm not, I'll be buried by you. And you go over on the right-hand side of the great gate. And when you see all of them come in, stand there and start hollering, Bill, 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 just as loud as you can. I'll meet you there. He draws Star of David. And Brother William writes there, right-hand side of the great gate. And I kissed her goodbye. I'm on the battlefield today. That's been nearly 20 years ago. I got my date with my wife. I'm going to meet her. There he was already saying that he was going to pass away. And I took the little baby. There is a part in the message. And know it not. And here he speaks something that is not here. How he had that battle. Notice on page 24, it says, when she left like that, he's also speaking about this part. When she left like that, I poured it over in the spiton, set the glass back down. I sat there, I thought, oh God, what have I done? You're a good God. Why did you let her die the other day, me holding her two little arms like that, begging him for her? Why'd you let her go? There is Billy laying there dying, and here she is dying. What have I done? Tell me. Well, I just might as well go with them. I opened the door, and no nurse was there, and I slipped down in the basement. That was before the hospital was fixed. That was when he went to see Sharon. Screens, no screens on the windows, hardly, and flies on her little eyes. Had a piece of mosquito bar. We call it netting put over her face. I shooed the flies off, lay there. Her little eyes. She suffered so hard till they were crossing. Then Satan moved up by my side of me there and said, did you say he was a good God? I said, yeah, I said that. Did you say he was a healer? Well, why did your father die in your arms over there? And you calling him a sinner? calling for his life. He should be crying for his life. Why did your brother die in your other brother's arm out there? And you standing in the pulpit preaching a few weeks ago said, then why didn't he answer you? See, he reminded him of all those things. You said he loved you and saved you. He couldn't tell me there was no God, because I already seen him. But he was telling me he didn't care for me. Said, there lays your wife. Your babies will be there pretty soon. Your daddy is buried. Your brother is buried. And your wife is going to be buried now, tomorrow. And here your other baby dying. He's a good God. He's a healer. Said, you made a sap out of yourself. What did it do? It was working from the outside now to this first man. Said, now look, you know, when you was a few years ago, about 2 or 3 years ago, before you accepted this, you was well thought of amongst the people. You lived a good, clean life. Any girl in the city that wanted to go out with you, because they felt clean and decent. I could stand before any of them. I never insulted one, never said anything. She even acts smart. I'll take her home. And you were like amongst the people. But what are you now? A religious fanatic. That's right, I was. All those things, he tells it as the devil was talking to him there in his mind. See these things begin to move together, the outside, reasoning in the spirit, moving these things together. That's right, Satan. And did you say he was a healer? Yes, yep. And you begging and crying, and the people telling you it wasn't so, that you're off the line. Your own church turned you out for this. Your own Baptist church down there put you out the door for the very same cause. Yep. Your daddy buried, your brother buried, your wife laying there to be buried. Here's your baby, just about 15 minutes longer, and he'll be gone. And he is a healer? You own flesh and blood. One word from him would save the baby's life. He's tempting him there. He's a healer, you said. The people tried to tell you. The preachers told you you was all messed up. You was all insane. You was become a religious fanatic. And you said he loved you. Could he love you? And how you cried for your daddy. How night after night you fasted. And in daytime when you had to pray to get up a pole to work. And when he let him die in your arms, a sinner. Now notice, the whole struggle that Brother Branham had there in his mind. And sometimes one thinks, oh my, these mental battles. Look, Brother Branham went through, perhaps you haven't even gone through an eighth of what Brother Branham went through. How your wife, what a fine woman she was, and how you loved her, Billy's mother. Many of you remember Hope. What a fine girl she was. How happy you was, your little home over there with about $7 or $8 worth of furniture, what furniture you had, but yet you loved her, and you loved one another, and you went and prayed for others and some mental emotion. They got up and walked away and said they were all right. So notice how the devil there is tempting him and accusing him. But now, your own wife, and there she is, dead. Second day now, laying in the undertaker's establishment down yonder, Scott and comes. He's a healer, And your little boy at the point of death, Billy Paul, 18 months old. And your little girl, at 8 months old, is laying here, dying, with meningitis, and you just prayed. And he writes, Sharon was 8 months old. Billy Paul was 18 months old. And God pulled a sheet down, said, shut up, don't hear. won't hear you at all. Notice everything he is still saying there, which Brother Branham there, in the other one we are reading, he narrated when he said that God did not want it to or did not hear him. Turn his back on you. He's a good God. He loves you. And every girl you ever went with, every boy you ever associated with, your very best friends had walked away from you as a religious fanatic. Everything he was telling me was the truth. Everything that he would say just fall right in line. Sometimes one say, wait, sometimes he seems to be right. Don't listen to him. He's a bluff. Remember that he will use the same word. See? Here. I was just then about ready to say, he was just about it. Then if that's the way he has to act, then I won't serve him. Just as I said that, there was something come from somewhere else, way down on the inside, said, who are you to begin with? The Lord gave and the Lord taken away. He went to the scripture. Same thing was when Jesus was tempted. It is written. See? That's that inside man. And he writes, the soul. That's that inside man doesn't reason at all. I look back and I thought, how did I get on earth? I come from a bunch of drunkards. How did I get here? Who gave me life? Who gave me that wife? Who gave me that baby? Where did my wife come from? Where did my life come from? I said, though he slay me, yet I'll trust him. I said, get away from me, Satan. I laid my hand over on the baby. I said, Sharon, honey, I'll lay you on your mother's arms in a few minutes when the angels of God comes to take you away. But one day, Daddy will see you again. I don't know how it's going to be, honey. I can't tell you how. When he turns his back upon me, won't even hear for you. He let my wife die, and me holding her by the hands, crying for her. And my daddy in his arm died on this arm right here, looking up at me, trying to get his breath. And I prayed as hard as I could. How could I face the public again to preach divine healing? How could I preach he was a good God and let my own daddy die a sinner? How could I preach that? I don't know how, but I know he's right. And there he draws a Star of David. The word of God shall never fail. It'll triumph no matter what that is. Then I know there was something inside of all reasoning, something inside of all emotions, everything else like that. There was an inside man that held in that hour. Nothing else could have done it. Every reason, everything could be showed. Everything could prove that it was wrong, and it was in the wrong. But the Word of God that was predestinated before the foundation of the world held on the inside. And I felt a little wind come through the building. Her spirit went to meet God. And he writes, the inside man. And he continues saying here, where we were in my life story, and I took the little baby. I'm on page 36. When it died, and put it in the arms of the mother, and we take it out to the cemetery. And I stood there to hear Brother Smith, the Methodist preacher that preached the funeral, ashes to ashes and dust to dust. And I thought, heart to heart. There she went. Not long after that, I took little Billy there one morning. He was just a little bitty fellow. He was. That's the reason he sticks with me and I stick with him. And he drew a Star of David there. And I had to be both, Papa and Mama, both to him. I'd take his little bottle. We couldn't afford to have a fire at night to keep his milk warm. I'd lay it under my back like this and keep it warm by the heat of my body. That is, he would put the bottle behind him and lay in bed, in the middle of the back, so it would stay warm. We stuck together like buddies. And one of these days, when I go off the field and I want to hand him the word and say, "Go on, Billy, you stay with it." Some people wonder why I got him with me all the time. I can't give him up. He's even married, but I still remember she told me, "Stay with him." And he drew a Star of David. And we stuck together like buddies. I remember walking around town, the bottle under my arm. That is under here. He'd get to crying. One night, he was walking out in the backyard where just when she was fixing to have him, she was smothering just a girl, you know. And I walked back and forth from the old oak tree in the back of the yard. And he was crying for his mama. And I didn't have any mama to take him to. And I'd pick him up and say, "Oh, honey," I said. He said, "Daddy, where's my mama? Did you put her into the ground?" He asked, "Did you put her into the ground?" I said, "No, honey. She's all right. She's up in heaven." And he said something there like to kill me one afternoon. He was crying. Was along late in the evening, and I was packing him on my back like that, packing him on my shoulder and patting him like this. And he said, "Daddy, please go get Mama and bring her here." And I said, "Honey, I can't get Mama. Jesus, 3 dots. In other words, in his second coming, they will all be brought back. Said, "Well, tell Jesus to send me my mama. I want her." And I said, "Well, honey, me and you going to go see her sometime." In other words, soon Billy will be gathering there, Billy Paul. And he stopped, said, "Daddy?" And I said, "Yes." Said, "I seen Mama up there on that cloud." My, like to kill me. I thought, my, I seen Mama up there on that cloud. I just almost fainted. I hugged the little fellow up to my bosom like that and just held my head down, went on in. Days passed. I couldn't forget it. I tried to work, couldn't go back home. It wasn't a home no more. And I wanted to stay. We didn't have nothing but just that old tore-up furniture. But it was something that she and I had enjoyed together. It was home. And I remember one day I was trying to work in the public service. I had went up to fix an old secondary, was hanging down. It was real early of a morning. And I climbed up this cross that is on the post above. And I couldn't give that baby up. I could see my wife going, but that baby going, just a little bitty thing. And I was on there, and I was singing. On the hill far away, stood an old rugged cross, and the primaries run down to the transformer and went out into, secondary. Those who work in electric energy knows how that is. Those transformers and those cables that go down those primaries. And I was hanging up there on it, and I happened to look, and the sun coming up behind me. And there my hands stretch out, and the sign of that cross on the hillside. And I thought, yes, it was my sins that put him there. And he draws a Star of David and said, Sharon, honey, Daddy wants to see you so bad, honey. How I'd like to hold you in my arms again. You darling little thing. I got beside myself. It had been weeks. I pulled off my rubber glove. There's 2,300 volts running right by the side of me. And I pulled off my rubber glove. I said, God, I hate to do this. I am a coward. But, Chari, Dad is going to see you and Mommy just in a few minutes. Started pulling off my glove to put my hand on that 2,300 volts. And Brother William writes there, he tried to commit suicide. It'd break. Why? You wouldn't even have no blood left in you. So I started pulling that glove off, and something happened. When I came to, I was sitting on the ground with my hands up like this to my face, crying. In other words, he was like this. It was God's grace, or I wouldn't be having a healing service here. I'm sure of that. It was him protecting his gift, not me. And Brother William writes, the gift, ministry. And below he draws a Star of David. And I started home. I quit, put my tools away, and went back and said, I'm going home. I started around the house, and I picked up the mail in the house, kind of cold, and I went in. We had one little room. I was sleeping on a little cot there, and the frost coming up, and that old stove. And I took the mail and looked in the mail, and the first thing on there was her little Christmas saving, 80 cents. Miss Sharon Rose Branham. There it was, all over again. I had been game warden. I reached in there and got my gun, pistol, out from the holster and said, Lord, I can't go this anymore. I'm dying. I'm so tormented. I pulled the hammer back on the gun, put it to my head. Kneeling there on that cot, in that dark room, I said, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thine will be done. And as I tried, and I squeezed that trigger as hard as I could, I said, On earth as is in heaven, give us this day our daily bread. And it wouldn't go off. And he drew a Star of David. And I thought, oh God, are you just tearing me to pieces? What have I done? You wouldn't even let me die. And I threw the gun down, and it went off, and shot through the room. In other words, when he threw it, Imagine that when it's so sensitive, but it hadn't gone off. When he throws it, then it goes off. And I said, God, why can't I die and get out of it? That's not the way to solve problems. Taking your life, that is not the way. Once again, Brother William writes, he tried to commit suicide. I just can't go no further. When those thoughts comes to you, remember, that is the wicked one, that is the devil. Suicide attempts and all that, that is not good. You've got to do something to me. And I fell over and started crying on my little old dirty bunk there. And I must have went to sleep. I don't know whether I was asleep or what happened. I've always longed to be out west. I've always wanted one of them hats. My father broke horses, and he writes, tamed, in his young days. And I always wanted one of them hats. And Brother Dimas Shakirian bought me one yesterday. First one I have ever had, like that. One of them kind of Western hats. There he draws a Star of David, and he writes, the West. And he draws a pyramid and the ages. And he writes, the fact that God's program was in the West influenced the desire of the heart of our brother Branham's soul. And I thought, I was going down along through the prairie singing that song, there's a wheel on the wagon, is broken, sign on the ranch for sale. And as I went along, I noticed an old covered wagon, like an old prairie schooner, and the wheels was broke, 'cause that represented my broken family. And he writes, Sharon. And as I got close, I looked, and there stood a real pretty young girl, about 20 years old, white flowing hair and blue eyes, dressed in white. Where he writes Sharon, he writes approximately 20 years old. And he draws a Star of David. I looked over at her and said, how do you do? Went on. She said, hello, Dad. And I turned back and said, Dad? Why? I said, how, miss, can I be your daddy when you're as old as I am? She said, Daddy? You just don't know where you're at. I said, what do you mean? She said, this is heaven. Said, on earth I was your little Sharon. He draws Star of David and he writes Sharon. Why? I said, honey, you was just a little baby. Said, Daddy, little babies are not little babies here. They're immortal. They never get old or never grow. And I said, well, Sharon, honey, you're a pretty young woman. She said, Mama's waiting for you. And I said, where? She said, up at your new home. And I said, new home? Branhams are vagabonds. They don't have homes. I said, well, I never had a home, honey. She said, but you got one up here, Daddy. I don't mean to be a baby, but it's just so real to me. Brother Branham weeps. As I started to thinking of it, it all comes back again. Said, you got one here, Daddy. I know I got one over there. Someday I'll go to it. She said, where's Billy Paul, my brother? And I said, well, I left him at Mrs. Brower just a few minutes ago. You can also, there's a little more information in the seals on 366. through 70 and on. And there you can see another part of some details that he doesn't speak of them here. Let's verify the page. It's around 366 to 370 and on, somewhere around there, where it was one of the occasions in which he went to the sixth dimension. And the things that happened there and the things that he's speaking to Sharon here. These are two places where there is much information. And he writes there, Billy Paul, Mrs. Broy, said, Mother wants to see you. And I turned and looked, and there was great big palaces, and the glory of God coming up around them. And I heard an angelic chorus singing, My home, sweet home. And I started up a long steps, running just as hard as I could. And when I got to the door, there she stood, a white garment on, that black hair, long, holding down her back. She raised out her arms, as she always did when I come home tired from work or something. I caught her by the hands, and I said, Honey, I seen Sharon down there. I said, she made a pretty girl, didn't she? She said, Yes, Bill. She said, Bill? Put her arms around me, and she said, just around my shoulder, she started patting me. She said, Stop worrying about me and Sharon. I said, Honey, I can't help it. She said, Now Sharon and I are better off than you are. And said, Don't worry about us no more. Will you promise me? And I said, Hope. I said, I've been so lonesome for you and for Sharon, and Billy cries all the time for you. I said, I don't know what to do with him. And she said, It'll be all right, Bill. She said, Just promise me you won't worry no more. And she said, Won't you sit down? And I look around, and there was a great big chair. And I remember I tried to buy a chair. Now, in closing, I tried to buy a chair one time. We just had them old common wooden bottom chairs for the breakfast set. We had to use them, the only chairs we had. And we could buy one of those chairs that you laid back in the back. Like I forget what kind of an easy rest chair, and it cost $17. And you could pay $3 down and $1 a week. And we got one. And when I'd come in, I'd work all day and preach till midnight around streets and wherever I could preach. And one day, I got behind on my payments. We couldn't make it. And it got day after day. And finally, one day, they come and got my chair and took it. And there he draws a Star of David. That night, I never will forget. She had me a cherry pie baked. Poor little old thing. She knowed I was going to be disappointed. And after supper, I said, "What's you so good about tonight, honey?" And she said, after she filled his tummy, and she said, "Say, I had the boys over in the neighborhood to dig you some fishing worms. Don't you think we ought to go down to the river and fish a little while?" And I said, "Yes, but..." And she started crying. I know there was something wrong. I had an idea, because they had already sent me a notice that was coming to get it. And he writes, the chair, and he draws a Star of David. And we couldn't make the dollar payment a week. We couldn't afford it. She put her arms around me, and I went to the door, and my chair was gone. She told me up there, she said, "You remember that chair, Bill?" And he writes, "The chair." And I said, yes, honey, I remember.
Y dijo,
Said,
eso es lo que tú
that's
estabas
what you was
pensando,
thinking about, wasn't it?
¿verdad? Sí.
Yep.
Y dijo,
Said,
bueno,
well,
ellos no
they
pueden
won't
quitarme
take
esto.
this one.
Ya
This
está
one's
pagado.
paid for.
Recuerden que ya ahí
Remember
pasó la
that there
cuando estaba
he
en
had
esa
already
dimensión.
gone to the scene
Ella
when
dijo,
he was in the sixth
siéntate por
dimension.
un minuto,
She
quiero hablar
said,
contigo.
sit down just a minute. I want to talk to you.
Vamos a ver si es aquí.
Let us see if it's here.
En este libro
In this book
de los
of
sellos,
the seals,
el que es sin editar,
the unedited one,
que es así de este color,
which is this color,
donde habla
where he talks
del sillón
about the chair
o de cosas, vamos a ver.
or things. Let's see.
Que leímos,
Which
estaba su-
we read where
relata, no sé si era
he speaks. I don't know if it's this book where he says things,
como si yo
something like chairs and things. When he says, all that you'll ever love, God will give it to you. I believe it's around there.
que estaba en este libro,
I understood it was in this book.
pero
However,
lo habíamos leído en
we
una
have read it
ocasión,
on one occasion.
la 322.
Let us see if it's page 369.
Puede ser en otro de los libros.
It could be in another book.
Ya después lo conseguimos, pero
We will find it later. But
ahí
notice,
estaba.
there he was, and he
Dije, "Quiero
says,
hablar
she said, sit down just a minute. I want to talk to you.
Dije, amor, no,
And I said, honey, I don't understand this.
no entiendo esto. Y ella dijo,
And she said,
"Prométeme, Billy,
promise me,
prométeme que
Billy,
tú no te vas a
promise
preocupar más".
me that you won't worry anymore. You're going back now.
Y repitió,
And said,
"Prométeme,
promise
Billy,
me
no te
you
vas a
won't
preocupar".
worry.
Y le dije,
And I
"No
said,
puedo hacer
I
eso".
can't do that, Hope.
Miren eso,
Notice.
23, vamos a ver.
Let us see if it's in 369.
Pero quería
They
saber
sent it to me, but I
exactamente
wanted to
qué
know
libro era.
exactly from which book it was.
En ese libro, en la
In
página
that book,
23,
on page 323 of the book in Spanish,
los azules,
he draws.
dibuja una piedra
He draws a cornerstone.
y
And
vamos a ver si aquí lo
let us
puedo-
see if I can,
porque fue yo creo que hace
because I think it was quite a while ago
que lo habíamos leído.
that we read it.
Mira a ver si,
See if you got it.
si le llegó. Donde él
Where he says, he writes there,
personas,
people.
o sea, porque está diciendo
In
que
other
todo
words,
lo
because
amado,
he's saying everything you have loved, God
dice personas,
will
animales,
give it to
casas,
you.
muebles,
And he writes,
etcétera.
people, animals, houses, furniture,
Está en
etc.
uno de los otros
That should be in one of the other books of the seals.
Prométeme que no te vas a que-
Promise me you won't worry.
Y le dije, no puedo
And I
hacer
said, I
eso,
can't
no.
do that, Hope.
En ese momento volví en mí,
And
porque
just then I
estaba
come to.
oscuro.
It was dark in the room. I look around and I felt her arm around me.
Y le dije,
I said,
Hope,
Hope,
estás aquí en
Are you here in the room? She started patting me. She said, "You're going to make me that promise, Bill? Promise me you won't worry no more." And he writes, hope beside it. He wrote, hope spoke. Hope spoke. He wrote that. When he came back to himself and said, "I promise you," he drew a Star of David. And then she patted me 2 or 3 times and she was gone. I jump up and turn on the light. Look everywhere, she was gone. But she gone out of the room. She isn't gone. She is still living. She was a Christian. Billy and I went to the grave here some time ago, packing a little flower for his mother and sister, just on an Easter morning. And we stopped. The little fellow started crying. He said, "Daddy, my mommy is down there." I said, "No, honey. No, she ain't down there. Sister ain't down there. We got a folded over grave here, but way across the sea, there is an open grave where Jesus rose. And someday he'll come. He'll bring sister and mama with him." And he writes 1 Thessalonians 4:14 to 17 and 1 Corinthians 15, 50 to 54. And he draws a Star of David. Remember that there in the 6th dimension, they are waiting for the coming of the Lord. And he writes Moses and Elijah. And he says that he will come and judge you. Those pages I told you of the seals, and then they will come here to earth. I'm on the battlefield today, friends. I just can't tell anymore. Brother Abraham weeps. God bless you. Let's bow our heads a minute. Oh Lord, many times, Lord, I'm sure people don't understand when they think these things come easy. But there is a great day coming when Jesus shall come and all the sorrows will be wiped away. I pray, Heavenly Father, there he draws a cornerstone and the ages. I pray, Heavenly Father, that you'll help us to be prepared. What for? For that event. And that last promise, when I kissed her on the cheek that morning, that I meet her there that day, I believe she'll be standing at that post, screaming my name. I've lived through to that promise since, Lord, around the world, in all kinds of places, trying to bring the gospel. Getting old now and tired, I'm wore out. One of these days, I'm going to close this Bible for the last time. And God, keep me faithful to the promise. Keep your grace around me, Lord. Let me not look at the things of this life, but live for the things that's beyond. Help me to be honest. I don't ask for a flower bed of ease. No, Lord. When my Christ died there under the suffering, and all the rest of them died like that, I don't ask for any easy thing. Just let me be honest, Lord, truthful. Let people love me so I can lead them to Thee. And someday, when it's all over and we gather around under the evergreen trees, I want to get her by the hand and walk her up to show the people of Angelo's temple and all the others. It'll be a great time then. And he writes there, with hope, and an arrow, and he draws a Star of David. Now, notice how all of this, he tells me then, read up to 46, paragraph 299. All of this is showing us something very important, which on page 571 in the Book of the Seals, it tells us. He is making this prayer here at the end of the seventh seal. And now, Father, we don't know when this great event will be. But when we see these signs appearing and scriptural happenings, it warms our heart above measure. And I pray, Father God, that you'll help us. I pray that you'll help our dear pastor, Brother Neville, make him Lord full of grace and full of power and with understanding, that he might take this stored food and feed the lambs of God. Lord, I pray that you keep sickness away from us. I pray that you keep all sickness away from us. May it come to pass that when people become sick, that they'll remember the present and all-sufficient blood of the Lord Jesus lays on the altar to make an atonement. And I pray that they'll be healed immediately. And I pray that you keep the power of Satan away from them to discourage them, or to try to make them make cults, or just keep all the powers of the enemy away, Lord. Notice the battle that he had there. He already knew. Look, when he finishes preaching the seventh seal, how he finishes his prayer here. Although what he preached on Monday was added to it later on. Sanctify us to thy word. Now remember that this time, the Lamb is no longer making intercession on the throne there in heaven. But that throne is a throne of judgment. But since that new mercy seat is available to the chosen ones of God, whom are still living on this earth, through the ministries of Moses and Elijah, God has mercy on his people, and God hears those requests through that new mercy seat. And that atonement is effective for them. Remember that the Feast of the Trumpets is then followed by the Feast of Atonement, which to the Hebrew people, what the seventh trumpet is to Israel, is the seventh seal to the church. What the ministries of Moses and Elijah are to the Hebrew people is the seventh seal, the coming of the Lord for the church. Granted, Lord, then, Lord, I pray that you'll help me. I'm beginning to fade away. Lord, I know my days can't be too many more, and I pray that you help me to be true, Lord, and honest and sincere, that I may be able to bear the message as far as it's ordained for me to bear. And when it comes to the time I must lay down, and I get down to the river, and the waves begin to come in, oh God, may I be able to, and he writes Elijah, to hand this old sword over to somebody else. And he writes Moses and Elijah. They'll be honest with it, Lord, and will pack the truth. And he writes the angel of Jesus. And in another book, here I have a little paper where in the other book he writes, the word to Moses and Elijah, the angel of Jesus. May I be able to hand this old sword over to somebody else that'll be honest with it, Lord, and will pack the truth. Now notice, our brother William here tells us that he had already departed by that time, and that in the time in which he lived, that prophecy was not fulfilled. And our brother William continues saying, and he says, there is one thing that has not yet been fulfilled, and that is the 10th vision. You can find it in the book of quotations. And he said it around the year 65, around there, more or less, which was the year he passed away. And there is one more place, because in 64, he also spoke. That is, there are two places. The one he talks about there in 65, but on page... Let us see here, on page 120, on paragraph 1068, where he says, now that great gift, others I've tried to explain, that is the first and second pulls, and say how it was done. This can't be explained. Just wait. It will not be in operation so perfectly now. Wait till that council of churches bring on that persecution. That's when it will happen. That's the reason I come back among you to pray for the sick. I have never had but one thing that he ever told me in my life that I know that hasn't happened yet. That's some sort of building or a tent where there will be a little building setting, and I have to go into that and pray for the sick. That hasn't happened yet as far as I know. That's the only thing I know. And above he writes, the tent, and there he draws a Star of David. And he writes, the tent equals is what has not been fulfilled. And he writes also the persecution and the third pull. And below he writes, Elijah prays for the sick again. And he also writes, the tent and the little room. And there also at the bottom he writes, what is missing equals the tent. And that of 1965 on page 150, paragraph 1335 says, and then I'm here to get the trustees together. I'm kind of getting put out of all this turning me down on place to hold a meeting when I'm feeling led to do it. So I think I'm going to ask if we just can't get our tent and put it up and just stay there, Get out here in the ballpark or out on a farm and move it from place to place, just as the Lord will lead. And I feel that that's the way He's going to do. There's a vision concerning that. And I think that may be the reason this happened. Now, a lot of times we think it's horrible because of certain things happen. But, that might be God, see, driving you into these things. When He said it, He'll do it. That was one of the places. That was in 1965. In July 18th of this message, trying to do a service without being the will of God. Above he writes, the tent. And our brother William continues saying, in other words, that was for after he departed from this earth. And that prophecy has to be materialized somewhere. And since the third pull will be fulfilled there, which is the mystery of the seventh seal, and also the sword in the hand, which is a creative word being spoken. And it is also the seven thunders uttering, and all that was in a language unknown to him. Therefore, it was not in English. Now notice, the third pull, the fulfillment of the 10th vision. Notice, that sword will be there, which is the word. And that word will be spoken, and the thunders will be spoken. And therefore, Christ, the mighty angel, speaking, and his voice uttering seven thunders. It is Christ speaking at the last day in another stage of the divine program, where at the end there will be a 10th cathedral, in other words, something gigantic, and Christ will be speaking there. If Christ will be speaking there, then he must have an instrument. Everyone expected him to speak through the Reverend William Branham, but it was not fulfilled at that time. If it was fulfilled at that time, then Christ, the Holy Spirit, in Holy Spirit, would have been speaking in him, and the seven thunders would have been uttering their voices and revealing the mystery of the seventh seal. Because the mystery of the seventh seal, which is the mystery of the coming of the Lord with his angels, and that, the mystery of the seventh seal, is the mystery of the seventh trumpet, which is Moses and Elijah, and the mystery of the seventh seal, which is the coming of the Lord. He says, the seventh trumpet and the seven seals are the same thing. It is the coming of the Lord. And that mystery is made known by the seven thunders of Revelation. In other words, the voice of Christ. It is Christ speaking. Christ, the mighty angel who comes down from heaven, the Holy Spirit speaking, and he has to speak through someone. And if the fulfillment of that prophecy had been in the time of the Reverend William Branham, then he had to speak through him, open that mystery. But he says that that mystery, notice in what time he says that that mystery will be open, in the fulfillment of the 10th vision. And it wasn't fulfilled in our brother William Soto Santiago either, because he says that will be open in the 10th, when we are in the 10th. And if it wasn't fulfilled in him either, then it will be fulfilled and must be fulfilled in the other one who God has already predestinated. He goes on to say, and where will the presence of God be in that great 10th cathedral when that ministry is operating? Operating for divine healing in a little room. The Reverend William Branham says, and made of wood. And what was the little room, the most holy place in the tabernacle made of? Of wood, covered with gold. Wood, humanity, and gold, divinity. And where is the gold in that little room that Brother Branham saw? The divinity. Well, now you can see why the fulfillment of the 10th vision is going to take place somewhere. And therefore, all the believers, the chosen ones in the last day, will desire for it to be in their countries. But don't worry, it will be in the West, and it will be in a non-English speaking continent, because what the Reverend William Branham heard was in another language. In other words, the third pull, the voice of the seven thunders uttering their voices, he heard it in another language. And if it was in another language, it has to come in another language. The thunders have to speak in another language. On page 561 in the Book of the Seals, it tells us. And just then he picked me up. He took me up and set me way up high to where a meeting was going on. Looked like a tent or a cathedral of some sort. And I looked, and there was a little box, little place over in the side. And I seen that light was talking to somebody above me. That light that you see there on the picture, and whirled away from me like that, and went over that tent, and said, "I'll meet you there." And said, "This will be the third pool, and you won't tell it to nobody." And in Sabino Canyon, he said, "This is the third pool." And one unfolded today, or yesterday. The other one unfolded today, and there's one thing I cannot interpret because it is an unknown language. But I stand right there and look right straight at it. And this is the third pool coming up. And the Holy Spirit of God, oh my, that's the reason all heaven was silent. And you already have everything that is written there. And on page 251, it tells us, the bride hasn't had a revival yet. See, there's been no revival there. No manifestation of God to steer the bride yet. See, we're looking for it now. He'll take those 7 unknown thunders back there to wake her up again. See, yep, he'll send it. He promised it. And in the fulfillment of the 10th vision is where he will be fulfilling that promise. And says further down, our brother William says, and now, the thunders is what will bring forth the revival of the church bride of the Lord on the last day. They will be revealing something to the church and will be giving her the faith to be transformed and taken with Christ to the marriage supper of the Lamb. That is the revelation that the church bride is receiving in this end time. And the content of that word, that teaching, is what the bride needs to be prepared to receive that promise of the resurrection of those who are coming from the 6th dimension, which will happen in the midst of that revival, of that awakening which the church bride is having in this time in which we are living. The third pool. There is a lot there that we could speak about, but there are things that must not be spoken, because that is how he has wanted it to be. But only as far as we need to know, understand, and the rest, he will know how to continue working in favor of both the wise virgins and the foolish as well, and the Hebrew people also, and the lost. So everything is going according to the divine program. Everything is being fulfilled as it was already designed by God in that program of the seventh seal, in that program which, upon being opened, There was silence in heaven for about half an hour. Look at this. I placed it there so that I wouldn't forget it. He writes, we have read this, I think, some time ago. The seventh seal equals the coming of the Lord to and for. And at the bottom, he comes to and for his church in the third pull to give her the rapturing faith. And he writes a revival, rapturing faith and of transformation to his church bride, the rapture. That is, he is already coming for her. And below he continues, for the foolish virgins, so they may go through the tribulation. And below, for the lost, as a testimony. In other words, he comes, he wrote there for those three groups. But we do know that there, the Hebrew people is where they will recognize him and see him. Because the third pull is for the bride, for the foolish, and for the lost, and for the Hebrew people. Let us stand. And thus, we live in this subject, the third pull. He always uses an instrument. Look, just this. I won't take up more of your time. We already finishing, but look at something. Later we can talk on another occasion about that healing angel. In this message, I brought it just in case, but let us read a small portion here. He says, in this message, obey the voice of the angel. Now, tomorrow night, on page 7, about this time or a little before, I will probably break my fast. Before speaking, many times he did not eat. And now I'm praying, and now I have nothing. If it gets away from me, I go out. I like fishing, hunting, talking, like anyone else. But when he comes, it's different then. And now he's here tonight to minister to you people. And I'm only his mouthpiece. And everyone be assured of that. And worship God and give him praise. And be humble. And he writes there, I am his mouth. He writes, the angel, I am his mouth. And he also writes, the angel ministers through a man. And that is why it is him. And it will always be him. Let us have here this part of this message, the third pull. And this message, there he tells us many things of which we will rejoice a lot about in relation to what is happening today. The third pull. With us, our dear brother and friend, Dr. William Soto Santiago.